What is the first symbol that comes to mind when you think of Christianity? It's instant, isn't it? The cross. It's on top of churches, hanging from necklaces, tattooed on arms. It's one of the most recognized symbols on the entire planet. For 2 billion people, it is the ultimate emblem of their faith, representing sacrifice, redemption, and the love of God. It seems as ancient and essential to the religion as Jesus himself. But what if I told you that for the first 300 years of Christianity, the earliest followers of Jesus actively avoided using the cross? What if I told you that to them, it wasn't a symbol of hope, but was a grotesque and shameful image, the equivalent of a modern electric chair or a hangman's noose? And that they had a whole other set of secret symbols to identify themselves. The story of how this hated instrument of torture became the most beloved symbol of a global faith is a story of art, of theology, and of a pagan emperor's battlefield vision that changed the course of history forever. Today, we're uncovering the surprising and forgotten history of the cross and answering the question, how did the ultimate symbol of death become the ultimate symbol of life? Title card: typography that perhaps forms out of ancient Roman or Christian symbols like the fish or anchor, before resolving into a classic cross. How the cross became Christianity's most famous symbol. It wasn't always. Let's transport ourselves back to the 1st and 2nd centuries, to the heart of the Roman Empire. Christianity is a new, fledgling movement, and it's a dangerous one to be a part of. Christians were a misunderstood and often persecuted minority. They were accused of atheism for refusing to worship the Roman gods, and their private meetings were viewed with suspicion. In this environment, advertising your faith with a public symbol was a terrible idea, and using a cross, it was unthinkable. We have to understand what the cross meant in the Roman world. Crucifixion was not just a method of execution. It was a form of state-sponsored terrorism. It was a punishment reserved for the lowest of the low, slaves, rebels, and the worst criminals. It was designed to be as slow, agonizing, and humiliating as possible. It was a public spectacle meant to say, this is what happens when you defy the power of Rome. For the earliest Christians, the cross was a symbol of shame. It was the brutal instrument that their enemies had used to torture and kill their savior. It was a trauma. So, instead of the cross, they used a variety of other symbols to discreetly identify each other. These were their secret signs. One of the most popular was the ichthys, or the fish. This was a brilliant choice. A fish was a common, innocent-looking symbol in a coastal Mediterranean world. But for Christians, it was a secret acronym. The letters of the Greek word for fish, iota chi theta upsilon sigma ichthys, stood for Isis. Christos, Theodios Soter, which means Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Two Christians could meet, and one could subtly draw one arc of the fish in the dirt. If the other person completed the drawing, they knew they were in safe company. They also used the anchor. The anchor was a symbol of hope and steadfastness in Roman culture, but Christians adopted it because it looked subtly like a cross, and because it represented the hope of salvation holding them steady through the storms of life. Other symbols included the peacock, which they believed symbolized immortality because its flesh was thought to never decay, and the image of the Good Shepherd, a gentle figure with a lamb over his shoulders. This was their preferred image of Jesus, not as a suffering victim, but as a caring protector. For 3 centuries, these were the symbols of Christianity: the fish, the anchor, the shepherd. The cross was nowhere to be found in their art or meeting places. To become the symbol we know today, the entire Roman world had to be turned upside down. The turning point, the event that changed everything, happened in the year 312 AD. The Roman Empire was locked in a civil war. A general named Constantine was marching on Rome to battle his rival, Maxentius. Constantine was a pagan, a worshipper of the sun god, Sol Invictus. But according to the legend, on the eve of the decisive battle of the Milvian Bridge, he had a vision. He looked up at the sun and saw a cross of light above it. And with it, the words, in Greek, Nu tau omicron y tau nu y kappa alpha, or in its Latin form, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you shall conquer. Constantine was shaken. That night, he had a dream in which Christ appeared to him and told him to make a military standard in the shape of the sign he had seen. He created the labarum, a banner with the Chi-Rho symbol, the first 2 Greek letters of Christ, which looks like an X overlaying a P. Constantine's troops, with this new Christian symbol painted on their shields, won a stunning victory. Constantine took control of the Roman Empire, and he attributed his victory to the God of the Christians. This was the single most important political event in the history of Christianity. With the stroke of a sword, the cross was transformed. It was no longer a symbol of shame and punishment for criminals. It was now a symbol of victory, of military triumph, and of the divine favor of the emperor. The religion that Rome had tried to crush had now conquered Rome. Constantine's conversion and his Edict of Milan in 313, which granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, ended the persecution of Christians. Suddenly, Christianity was not only safe, it was fashionable. It was the religion of the emperor, and its new imperial symbol was the cross. This political revolution sparked a theological one. As Christianity moved from the margins to the center of power, the way it presented itself began to change. The focus shifted from the gentle, teaching Jesus of the Good Shepherd to a more powerful, divine figure, Christ the King, or Christus Victor, the triumphant victor over death. And what better symbol for this triumphant victory than the very instrument of death he had conquered? The cross became the perfect symbol for this new theological emphasis. It represented two things at once: the depth of Christ's suffering and sacrifice for humanity, and his ultimate triumph over death in the resurrection. It was a symbol of both humiliation and exaltation. This new reverence for the cross was supercharged by Constantine's mother, Helena. In the year 326, she made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and, according to legend, she discovered the true cross upon which Jesus had been crucified. Pieces of this cross became the most sacred relics in the Christian world. They were housed in magnificent churches built by Constantine. The veneration of the cross as a holy object began to spread like wildfire. Christians, who for centuries had avoided the image, now flocked to see, touch, and pray before it. Art began to reflect this change. For the first few centuries after Constantine, the cross was almost always depicted as empty. This was the crux invicta, the victorious cross. It was often decorated with jewels and gold, a symbol not of suffering, but of the glorious resurrection. It wasn't until much later, in the Middle Ages, that the crucifix, the cross with the body, or corpus, of Jesus on it became popular. This shift in art reflected another shift in theology, which began to emphasize the humanity and suffering of Christ as a path to inspiring piety and devotion in believers. And so, the journey was complete. A symbol that began as a horrifying public instrument of torture, so shameful that a persecuted faith refused to use it, became something entirely new. First, it became a sign of imperial power and military victory, thanks to a Roman emperor's vision on a battlefield. Then, it became the central emblem of a new theology that focused on Christ's triumphant victory over death. And finally, it became the universal symbol of faith we know today, capable of representing both profound suffering and ultimate hope. The story of the cross is a powerful testament to how the meaning of a symbol is never fixed. It can be transformed by history, by power, and by the changing beliefs of the people who use it. It is a story of how the most reviled image in the Roman Empire became the most sacred symbol in the Western world. So, the next time you see a cross, remember its incredible, hidden history. Remember the fish, the anchor, and the shepherd. And remember that for the first Christians, the very idea of using a cross as their symbol would have been unthinkable. Now that you know this history, does it change your perception of this ancient symbol? Does it make it more or less powerful to you? I'd be fascinated to read your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this final exploration in our series, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed for all our future deep dives into the surprising stories that have shaped our world. Thanks for watching.